If there is a program that sparks your interest and just makes your heart sing, and there is a scholarship that you think could support that program, I would always encourage you to apply. But if you really want to stack the odds in your favor, make sure that you start months in advance and you put a lot of time and thought into your applications.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Student Lawyer podcast series. Whether you're at school, sixth form, university, thinking about a career in law, or exploring law careers, you're in the right place. We are the one-stop shop for student lawyers. If you'd like to join the Student Lawyer as a writer, please email hello@thestudentlawyer.com. Welcome to the Student Lawyer podcast series. My name's Camilla. I'm a solicitor and I'm going to be your host for today. In today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Daria Levina, who's studied in Russia, Germany, the United States, and Italy. Daria has not one but two PhDs, holds a master's degree from Harvard Law School and a doctorate from the European University Institute in Florence, Italy. Noteworthy achievements include earning a doctoral grant with a 2.9% success rate and being awarded $140,000 in LLM scholarships. Daria is an admissions coach, an author, and Harvard State of Mind founder. In this episode, Daria will be sharing her top tips on making successful applications to top education institutions, explaining how to secure scholarships and how she secured funding for academic trips, and insight into how all of these experiences have benefited her, and much, much more. So without further ado, let's welcome Daria onto the show. Welcome, Daria. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Camilla. I am very, very happy to be your guest here today.
Thank you. We're so pleased to have you on the show. I wondered if you could start off by giving us an insight into why you're so passionate about making education accessible.
Sure. Well, I guess for me, it comes back to my background and primarily my socioeconomic background. So I grew up in a Russian countryside, and the main, to be precise, the only type of education that I had access to was public education. And sometime around ninth grade, I started participating in competitions. They were called Olympiads, and we had them pretty much in every subject, including law. And I did really well. I won 3 of them. And that actually allowed me to choose among faculties of law across the country, because a winner of a national competition was essentially exempted from the entrance exams. And it's just that type of opportunity has given me so much in terms of upward social mobility and the life that I could create, that I am very passionate about helping others do the same and transform their lives in meaningful ways. And I think education is one of the most powerful ways to achieve it. For me, it is a way to transform any of the demographics that you were born into, and essentially declare your value to the world, and just be free from the socioeconomic script that the society imposes on you. And I think that's very powerful. I don't think there's anything more powerful, not to me. And that's essentially my motivation to do what I do.
That is such an inspiring story. It's so interesting to hear about your background, and I really liked what you said about rewriting the socioeconomic script that you've been born into. I think that's really powerful, and I'm very excited to hear now a bit more about how you've done that. So thank you for sharing. So what are your top tips for making successful LLM or PhD applications to prestigious institutions?
Yeah, happy to talk about it. So number one is not assume that it's a lottery. When I was at the European University Institute, I was a part of the admissions committee for a couple of years. And something that I've seen a lot in the applications was that a lot of people wrote them as if they thought, well, it's out of reach anyway, so I'm just going to submit whatever I can write last minute. I think it's very helpful to remind yourself that admissions and scholarships, they are about people evaluating people. And people on the admissions committee, they actually put a lot of effort into trying to understand who is worthy, because they really want to give the opportunity to someone who needs it and who deserves it. And putting effort in the application is one way to show that it's important to you and it's going to make a difference in your life. So one of my top tips is just try your best when writing your applications. The other one is start as soon as possible. I think my ideal timeline is starting at least a year in advance, or maybe 6 months. But that's you should ensure that you have enough time to prepare all of the parts of the application, especially the essays. Because what I see a lot are people who say, hey, I want to apply to Harvard. Can I do it in 3 weeks? So the deadline approaching very soon. And that just that's not the most effective way to do it. You can still do it. I'm sure there are people who would brag that they didn't put in much work and they still succeeded. But if you really want to stack the odds in your favor, make sure that you start months in advance, and you put a lot of time and thought into your applications, especially the essays. My next tip would be to ask for feedback. Whether you have someone who's done an LLM or PhD, or even someone who is not an expert, just ask people to give their honest review of your thoughts, because it's very difficult to see the quality of your writing when you are inside of it. And if you don't have anyone to ask, a strategy that worked for me, for instance, in the past, is reading your documents out loud. It can be really helpful for spotting mistakes, inconsistencies in your argument, and just externalizing the ideas that you've lived with in your head for too long to be able to assess them. So I would say those are my top tips for the applications.
I really like those. I think, yeah, starting early, I can imagine that's quite important. So I know that you mentioned a year in advance. Do these applications open like a year in advance, more than a year? What's the earliest that you can start like thinking about applications?
So very often, the application itself will be available several months in advance. But a lot of times, I just advise people to start even sooner, because the requirements for like what needs to be included in the application, they are still available on the website even when the application form is not open yet.
Oh, okay.
And I do work with people who usually start a year to 6 months in advance.
Okay. That's helpful to know. Thank you. And in your experience, what are the most common challenges that applicants face, and how can these be overcome?
Thank you. So I would say that number one, evaluating your own background. I see a lot of people being just too close to what they've done over their lives, and they would come to me say, well, I just don't know what I can offer. And then we start discussing what they've done, and it turns out that there is a lot. They've they've just devalued it, or they haven't been able to see it. And so that's challenge number one. And I've actually written quite recently an extended blog post on various techniques that I suggest to create some distance between your background and yourself. One of them I mentioned is to just talk through your applications out loud, or talk to other people about it. Especially try to find someone who is not completely foreign to your area, but someone who still understands it. For instance, if it's a friend, maybe like if you're a lawyer, maybe a lawyer friend, because they will be able to better just understand what it takes to do what you do. Another technique that I suggest is doing evaluation of your profile as a separate stage in your applications, because a lot of times people just start writing the application, or for instance, they just start writing an essay or compiling a CV. And I think it's really helpful to do the inventory of everything that you've done. And I usually suggest not strictly separating the personal and professional, because I mean, of course, the LLM application will be mostly about professional achievements, but personal and professional, they feed into each other. You can uncover a lot of valuable insights about what drives you if you examine them in their entirety. I would say another challenge that people often face is how to connect their background and the motivation to pursue a particular program. That one is really hard because a lot of times the question I would get is, well, I've done all these things, but how do I actually explain why I'm interested in these courses or in this particular program, or why I'm applying to the US or the UK, whatever it is? And that is very difficult. And my observation is that the main problem that applicants usually face is that when they try to write their applications, especially the essays, they usually start with the essay prompt and they try to answer it directly. Like, let's just say, for instance, Harvard LLM application asks you to provide an insight into your background and why you want to pursue this degree, and an applicant would start writing their essay that there are two reasons behind my motivation to pursue an LLM. And so when the prompt drives your analysis of your motivation, your background, it's very hard to provide a compelling and convincing argument. And the strategy that I usually use to overcome that is to start with crafting your message, your application message first, and do preliminary work to analyze your background and why you do the things you do, why you do them the way you do. And then once you have that message and your understanding of who you are and why you've come to the point where you're applying for an LLM, then map it onto the essay prompt. Because the essay prompts, they will vary, but in a nutshell, they will mostly ask about the same. They will ask about the argument, why you're a strong candidate, and why you want to pursue this program. Like, in a nutshell, that's it for pretty much any LLM program. I would say those are the main challenges and how I would handle them.
Really interesting to hear that, and I think you've explained how to handle them really, really clearly and well. I think it's quite common that people really do struggle to sell themselves, sort of going back to your first point. And I think it is like a muscle that you need to sort of develop, because it does feel a bit alien at first. But those tips that you gave are really, really helpful. And yeah, that does sound like a really difficult to answer question on Harvard's LLM application. But yeah, it's so interesting the way you broke it down, and you almost kind of have to get to know yourself a bit better before you can answer these questions. So I think that's really interesting to hear. And so I know that you mentioned in one of your previous answers that, applicants shouldn't be discounting themselves. And that kind of leads me on to my next question, which is, who should be applying for scholarships and why?
Yeah. So I think there isn't actually a threshold that separates people who should apply and people who shouldn't. I think if there is a program that sparks your interest and just makes your heart sing, and there's a scholarship that you think could support that program, I would always encourage you to apply. And one part is, as I mentioned, education and its accessibility are just so fundamental to me that I always encourage people to secure the funding they need to pursue the education that would make their lives better and the lives of people around them better. Another reason is that what I often see is that people who decide not to apply for something, it is often very qualified applicants with low self-esteem, and very often female gender socialization. Not always, but very often. And I see that a lot. And one of the reasons that I've heard is that, well, obviously, yes, one is that that scholarship is too high to reach for me. And another one is that, well, if I apply, what if there is someone more qualified, but then I will take away their spot? And there are three answers that I usually give to applicants like this. First is that it's very, as I mentioned, it's very, very hard to see the value of your profile from the inside. Maybe you're brilliant, you just don't see it. Just give it a chance. Answer number two is that you never know who you are competing against. There is no way you will know that. And answer number three is that because you don't know who you're competing with, there is no way you can take away anyone's spot, because you are also not making decisions. Your only decision here is to apply, but whether you get the scholarship or not is ultimately up to the selection committee. And if there is someone more deserving, they will give it to that person. That's not yours to worry about. So I think, yes, as I mentioned, if you see a program with a funding opportunity, apply. And if you are someone who is insecure about your achievements, especially apply, I would say.
Thank you, Daria. Yeah, I really like your point about not knowing who you're competing against. I think that's maybe similar to when you make sort of job applications and training contract applications. For me, I sometimes would be scared to apply or just not want to apply because I think, oh, I'm not going to get this. I'm not going to, even put myself in the running. But then after I realized that, say, 80% of applications have typos and grammatical errors, for example, you can be in the top 20% just by taking your time and writing something well. So yeah, that's just a personal story.
I'd like to take a moment to speak about the University of Law, which is the university I decided to study my LPC at. The University of Law is the sponsor of this podcast and makes it possible for us to continue bringing these episodes to you. So we really appreciate you supporting us by supporting our sponsors. What really sets the University of Law apart from other universities is its belief in training students for the real world from the moment they accept a place. The University of Law's experienced career service and award-winning pro bono clinics offer students the chance to get real-life legal experience which can boost employability. They offer a range of undergraduate and postgraduate legal training and master's degrees designed by qualified experts to help students excel at any stage of their career. Their courses are employment focused, honing key skills in a teaching environment based on real legal practice. Part-time and online study options are also also available on many of their courses to help students work and study at the same time. If you'd like to find out more about the courses on offer, please click the link in the description box of the podcast.
I mean, I think we've kind of covered this a little bit, but it'd be great to dive a bit deeper into what are your top tips for making scholarship applications?
Sure. One of my tips would be to keep in mind that what is obvious to you is obvious to you. What do I mean by that? A lot of times, what I see in scholarship applications is that an applicant would assume that the admissions committee intimately knows the applicant's environment and the applicant's world. And it is very, very important, if you want your application to be successful, to recognize that the admissions committee or the selection committee doesn't know your world. You do. And so it's your duty to explain your world to them in a way that they understand. And I would suggest when writing your applications, always check against just how much knowledge you assumed on the other side, on the side of the people you're writing for, and make sure that you assume as little as possible and be very clear about the circumstances you are in, whether it's a merit scholarship or a need-based scholarship, whatever it is, just be very clear about what it is that your world consists of and what you want them to know. Because most probably, in 99% of cases, what you think they would know, they will not. Another tip is have a bias for inclusion. And so the thing is, a lot of scholarships, they would have very narrow eligibility requirements. And the impulse can be to assume that, well, if you don't fit in, then you don't fit in. And in many cases, it is going to be correct impulse. In many cases, the eligibility criteria, they will be binary, but not always. And the approach I would recommend is whenever you see a scholarship and there are criteria that you think you might fit in, try reaching out to the funding authority or even submitting an application, because it is quite possible that some of the criteria can be negotiable. And just to be clear, as I mentioned, in 9 out of 10 cases, this won't be the case. But in one case, they will make an exception for you, and maybe that's the only time you need. For instance, when I applied for a scholarship from a tiny American foundation to fund my Harvard degree, so the way they funded their fellows was that they had partnerships with 5 American universities, and you would first apply to the foundation and secure a scholarship from them, and then they would negotiate if they decided to award you a fellowship or a scholarship. They would negotiate a tuition waiver and admission for you to one of those 5 partner universities, and Harvard wasn't one of them. And I decided to try, and they made an exception for me, and that was terrific because it was over $20,000. That was huge. It covered my living expenses in the US. So I would recommend have a bias for inclusion and just try to entertain the possibility that there may be more for you than you think. And I guess my third tip would be have a bias for negotiability. Things are usually more negotiable than they appear. And I know people who received a scholarship, and in their circumstances, that just was not enough. And they decided, instead of saying, thank you, but I can't, they reached out and explained their circumstances and asked whether there was a an opportunity to negotiate a larger grant, and they were successful. So I would advise to, whenever you can negotiate. I've created a whole guide on how to negotiate financial aid. So it's available on my website, and yes, it's free.
Thank you, Daria. Yeah, we're going to come on to your resources a bit later because you've given us a bit of a sneak peek of some of the fantastic publications and resources that you've got. So very excited to talk about those, and of course we'll leave links to them in the description of the podcast. But thank you so much for sharing those stories about, how you just asked for what you needed and you were able to get it. So I think that's so inspiring, and I hope that it encourages our listeners to do the same thing, and just not to, step back or step away if the terms don't necessarily suit them. So thank you for sharing that. And so I read your blog post about how you secured funding for your academic trips, and I thought that was really, really interesting, and unique. And I thought that your experiences might help to inspire our listeners. So could you tell our listeners a little bit more about this and what benefits you gained from the trips?
Yes, before I do that, can I ask you to tell me what resonated with you about this post?
I mean, I just thought it was incredible, the fact that you wanted to, do an academic trip and you were able to secure funding in such a unique way. I thought it was really different, and you obviously really thought outside the box about how to kind of do this, and it wasn't just the normal path. So I thought, I thought it'd be useful for our listeners to understand so that they wouldn't necessarily think, oh, this is completely out of my reach, or maybe they don't even know that you could get funding for academic trips. So yeah, it's just something that was completely new to my world, and something that I thought was worth sharing with our listeners.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I'm very happy that it resonated with you, because I think most people who come to my blog, they usually tell me about the post I've written on personal statements or an essay on legal topics that is also a part of an LLM application. And I'm very happy that my funding search tips were useful and inspiring. So just to give a little bit of a context to our listeners, I talk about largely two categories of study programs in that post. Programs that come with the scholarships, and programs that I wanted to do, but there was no straightforward path to fund them. And I think I would now I would concentrate on that category. There were quite a few of programs like this when I was just really inspired by something, and I was ready to take any steps needed to find a way to fund them. One of the study trips like this was actually my very first trip abroad. It was to study English in London. I funded it with a combination of the prize money that I got by participating in all those Olympiads that I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, and I also participated in the Faculty of Law Science Society, and I co-hosted various conferences and things, and so the head of the society, he decided to recommend me for an additional scholarship at the university, at the Moscow State University, and that was quite unexpected, but that allowed me to fund that first trip abroad. Another one was to fund a moot court, because we had only a couple of moot courts at the Faculty of Law, and only two were funded, the Jessup and the Wismut. And I, at the time, during my third year at the university, I participated in a French moot court, and that was really exciting. And the first time, our coach, she found found money. I think she secured some funding from a firm. We had in Moscow there was an office of Gilles Lauriette Noël, and they covered a part. But then a couple of years later, when I coached the team, we couldn't secure any funding, and my team, they really wanted to go compete in the international rounds. It was a year when Cuba hosted the competition, and it was just very, very exciting to go there and not just be a tourist, but discuss the issues of public international law there. And so me and my one of the team members, we did a lot of funding search, especially the team, one of the team members, and he was able to find just a tiny private foundation. I think it was part of a gymnasium in Moscow, and they decided that they would fund those bright students from the Moscow State University to support the participation in the competition, and that was also very unexpected. And we explored so many paths. We reached out to so many law firms and other foundations and the like. And one of those ways that it just really worked out. I think another way that I engaged an unconventional way to fund a study was when I was thinking how to fund the Harvard degree, because it was just so expensive, and I really wanted to do academic work afterwards. I was just really committed. I knew that like as much value as I gained from working in a law firm, I didn't envision myself there long term. So it wasn't an option for me to take a huge loan and then pay it off. Also, I couldn't take a loan because I was a citizen of a country under sanctions. And so I decided to crowdfund. And I actually raised $27,000, almost half of my tuition. And it was incredibly scary. And I thought it was really scary to put myself out there for a public crowdfunding campaign and for a project that, I mean, I hope that my academic work benefits a lot of people, but it is not as when you crowdfund for something like that, it's very different from crowdfunding for an art project or for business, where you can immediately offer value to people who participate. So that was very scary, and I was just I was very surprised and happy that it worked out. And I guess for our listeners, from those stories, what I'd like them to take away would be that, number one, in funding, there are guidelines, such as you can apply for scholarships, and I've applied for a lot of scholarships, but mostly it's exceptions. And you can negotiate your way in this world to achieve what is needed. I would say that number two is when sometimes you can choose a program first and then look for funding. And sometimes it works, like in the cases that I've told about, but sometimes it doesn't. And another strategy that I also used a lot is I looked specifically for programs that were funded from the start. And I've also done a lot of those, such as the Hague Academy of International Law, the Max Planck Institute, where I did 2 research stays. They all had very clear funding paths that I found through their websites, and I didn't get them on the first try, both. I applied twice, but in the end, I was able to secure funding. And so whenever you are faced with a challenge, how to fund a study that you want, there are multiple ways to go about it. And I guess another takeaway is that a lot of opportunities, they are available to some people and not available to other people for the reasons that you have no control over. I think in a world that is very that puts a lot of emphasis on the individual agency, it's very hard to recognize that there are things that you can control and things that you can't. And I think for me, it has been very helpful to understand that there are steps that I can take and I can do my best. But if it doesn't work out, it's okay. I think everybody is human, and there should be just try to, I would say, try to be more accepting of yourself and the obstacles that you deal with, because they're often real, and acknowledging them and still taking steps forward is the best you can do.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's really easy to look at someone such as yourself, or someone who's taken a similar path, and think, well, clearly they get accepted for everything they apply for because, look at what she's done. But like you said, you didn't get accepted on a couple of things the first time round, and I'm sure it's not the case that you've been accepted for everything. And that's just life, like you said. Sometimes it's just going to be beyond your control. But yeah, no, I'm sure that will help our listeners to think that, okay, it doesn't matter if you get turned away for something, keep going, also try to improve for your next application, etc. So no, I think that's really important to know about your path. So moving now on to your resources, like I said earlier, you have given us a bit of a peek into what you have on your blog, but I wondered if you could go into a bit more detail about the resources that you have.
Yeah, sure. And I just wanted to add a little bit more about what you've said to the previous question. I've written a lot of posts, both on my blog and on LinkedIn, where I talk about failures and the times when I wasn't accepted. And I think there's a lot of value in talking about it openly. And I usually try to be very specific because I found that, for instance, for me, when someone very distinguished just genuinely talks about how normal failure is, it doesn't do much for me. But what does a lot for me is hearing about the exact things that someone tried and they didn't work out. And I do try to talk as openly as I can about the applications that succeeded and applications that didn't. So yes, I agree with what you said a lot. For the resources, first of all, as you mentioned, I have a blog, and I usually write there long form posts about in-depth strategy for crafting a particular part of an application. Mostly LLM, more will follow about PhD and postdoc applications. I also have created guides and courses. I have a guide on how to write a personal statement for a Master of Laws, especially, and a course that covers very comprehensively the main aspects of an LLM application, such as letters of recommendation, essays, crafting a compelling CV, strategies for funding, all of that, search for programs. So everything I know and everything that I could generalize about applications is there. And I have made available separately guides on how to look for funding, how to negotiate financial aid, how to develop a winning CV. And that was based on my experience of being on the admissions committee at the European University Institute. And I have a guide on the core components of an LLM application. And when you are just starting out, what are the main parts and what you should be on the lookout for. So these are my main resources.
Thank you so much, Daria. I'm going to leave links to all of those, everything that you mentioned in the description box of the podcast. Is there anywhere that the listeners can connect with you? Are you on LinkedIn, Instagram? Where can we find you?
Sure. I write on LinkedIn. I also just launched a Telegram channel, and I called it like my main project, Harvard State of Mind. And there isn't a lot yet, but I plan on publishing there more on the application process and just sharing my insights and experience there. And I have a website where I write, and I have a newsletter there. You can subscribe on my website and just get application tips straight to your inbox.
Thank you. Again, for the listeners, I'll leave links to all of those where I can. So we've come to the end of the episode. Thank you so much, Daria, for being a guest on the show. You have just given us so much knowledge and wisdom and value in this episode. So I'm sure that our listeners will agree. It's been a jam-packed episode. So thank you so much for coming on. It's been great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
No worries at all.
I really appreciate the opportunity to share what I know.
Thank you. And thank you to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
To hear more of the Student Lawyers podcast, hit the subscribe button and leave us a star rating and review. If you would like to join The Student Lawyer as a writer, please email hello@thestudentlawyer.com.